Okay. Hi, Linda. How are you?
I am great, Doug. How are you? And I'm so happy to be here with you today. Thank you.
Oh, my pleasure. Thank you for coming on the show. It's nice to have you here. Uh, Before we got on, we were talking about your life and what you've been doing with yourself. Tell us a little about your past and what you've been doing, and then we'll get to the two books that are the Otter and the Dog in the Room.
I have had more jobs than, in the old fashioned expression, you can shake a stick at. I have always been self employed and never worked for a company or a corporation. And I've done things as varied as I used to own a beauty salon. I was not a hairdresser, but I was married to one. And so we opened up a salon and I ran the business. Then I got divorced and had to find a new job, but I knew how to do makeup because I was a child, I wanted to be an actress. So I had gone to theater school in New York City, and makeup was part of the career or the schooling. And so I was able to take my knowledge of makeup, and I then started a 25-year career as a makeup artist for TV commercials and what is referred to as industrial films or training films. Did some made for TV movies, made up an incredible amount of people during that period of time who were actors and TV personalities and sports stars and politicians. And then I remarried, and both of our lives changed tragically and unexpectedly on a date in May in 1991. And as my husband says, the worst day of our lives also became the best day of our lives. He was burned in a car fire. It was life threatening for 16 days. And now life couldn't be better. But because of his injury, it took us to the world of working with burn survivors. And I, for 25 years, was the executive director of a very small nonprofit for burn survivors. And I developed all the programs that it had. We did a juvenile fire center program. We did one-on-one peer support groups. We did fire education with firefighters and taught it in schools. And I also founded a camp for burn injured children that covered the state of Missouri, the state of Kansas, and several of the other Midwestern states. The camp is still existing. And then I retired. I guess it's 9 years ago this month. And I'm a very active person. And everybody said to me, "What are you going to do with yourself?" And I said, "I don't know." And they pestered me. And I said, "Well, I might decide to learn how to paint." So coming up in March 6 years ago, I started taking watercolor classes, and I'm still painting. I'm still taking classes. And then coming up on 3 years ago, next month, um, Otto arrived into our lives with a big surprise. And a neighbor of mine pestered me that I should write a book. And I said, "I don't know how to write a book." And this went on every day for several weeks. And I would look at her and say, "You write the book." And so finally one day, just to shut her up, I sat at the computer and I very quickly wrote a children's book. And then I thought, well, I'm an artist. I could paint the pictures for it. And that was how Otto the Otter, a big surprise, came into being. It was strictly an accident.
I noticed on your books that you are the writer and illustrator, which is a more unusual. Um, Usually it's one or the other, and there's a collaborative work, so that's good. The other interesting thing I saw was that Otto the Otter was a real otter that encountered you, or you encountered him.
Yes, the home we bought, we live in Florida, and the home we bought has a retention pond next to it. We thought it was great because it meant we would never have a next door neighbor. And 2 days before closing, my husband called me at my office and he said, "We may have a problem." And I go, "What?" I mean, nobody wants to hear that just before closing. And he said, you know the pond? And I said, of course. He goes, we own it. And I went, really? So we own this retention pond that's right next to our home. I can look out my window and see it. And we look out there 20, 30 times a day because you never know what kind of birds we're going to see. We've identified 35 species of wading birds and ducks. And we were here about a month. And one day I was looking out the window and I started to scream for him. And he goes, what's the problem? And I go, come here, hurry, hurry. I go, what's that? And he looks out the window and he goes, I'm not sure. And he watched it a little longer and he goes, we have an otter. I had never seen one other than maybe at a zoo. And he doesn't live here. He's not here all the time. But he would show up 2-3 days in a row. Then we might not see him for a week or 2 weeks. Then he would come again. And then we maybe wouldn't see him for another month. And then he would come every day for a week. I mean, you never knew when he would show up. It was always exciting. And I started calling him Otto. I'd go, Otto's here, Otto's here. I have thousands of pictures of him. We have video footage of him. And then 3 years ago, COVID was already functioning and we didn't see him all winter. And I asked my husband, I said, I sure hope he's okay. We didn't know how old he was. He'd crossed the streets. Anything could have happened to him. And one day, Otto showed up with a big surprise. And if I tell you more, I just told you what the book is about.
Well, no, don't spoil that. What I'm curious about, do you live in a fairly rural area?
No, we live, where we live is, if you created a triangle of Tampa up here and St. Petersburg down here, and then you drew the third point of the triangle out here, that's where we live. We live in a small city right next to Clearwater. It's very much an urban area. It's also filled with tourists. Our home is 1.5 miles from the beach, from the Gulf of Mexico. Oh. And so it's anything but rural, but there are otters everywhere. And every time I go to a market to sell my book, or I can be anywhere and people say to me, I've seen otters.
That's interesting because I had no idea that they were that, I don't want to use the term domesticated, but I thought they would be a little bit more out in the woods than
well,
living.
They can be found anywhere. It's interesting because I knew absolutely nothing about otters until I started to write the book. And then I started doing research on them. And now because I go to schools and I read the book and do some education about them. So I've learned that otters are found on every continent of our planet except for 2 continents. And these are river otters, not sea otters, where the sea otters are pretty much found over in the Pacific Ocean and a few other places, but it's always saltwater, where river otters are freshwater animals. And they're found in all 50 states of the United States. We had almost made them extinct in the 1950s. They have the densest fur of any animal, and their fur became very desirable by women who wanted their fur coats to be of otter, or sometimes they called it nutria in those days. And so they were killing them right and left to get their skins, and they almost made them extinct, and then they started to protect them.
Okay. We've only got a few minutes left, so I want to move on to the other book too. Little Lost Dog. Tell us a little about that one.
It is also a true story, and both books talk about the people in the gray house, but the people in the gray house are my husband and myself. And 2 years ago, we found this little dog walking on our street. And the book is about ownership of a dog or any pet, and the fact that it didn't have a dog collar on it, so we didn't know who the owner was. It didn't have a microchip in it, so we couldn't tell anything about it. And through a lot of effort and signs and phone calls, we eventually found his new forever mom. So it's got a happy ending.
So he was a stray?
Well, we think he was dumped. Had not been on the streets for a long time. He was very clean. He didn't look like he was starving, that, he just didn't have that look about having been on the streets for 2 weeks or a month or more. And, sometimes dogs, you open a door and a dog just skitters out and you can't catch him. So he could be lost that way. Or living where we live, there's a lot of senior citizens. And so we think that perhaps an ambulance came to the house and they leave the door open when they're dealing with a stretcher. And so he could have run out that way. Or it could have been a person who went to a nursing home or had died, and their children didn't know what to do with this little dog and didn't want it. So they just left it in a very nice subdivision, hoping somebody would take care of him.
Wow.
So we don't know this. I often think, I wish he could just talk to me and tell me the truth.
Yeah. So he's your dog now?
No, we found a woman who wanted him badly, and I tell people, not literally, but he figuratively died and went to heaven. He couldn't lead a better life. This woman cooks for him every day.
So both books are out, and what age groups would these books be for?
0 to 10.
0 to 10?
Yeah, people are starting to ask for books when they have baby showers, and people are definitely reading to their little children when they're 1 and 2. And I had a woman yesterday tell me that her 3-year-old is already reading because she started reading to him so young.
Wow.
And when I do schoolwork, I've taken it up through 5th grade, which are the 10-year-olds, and they thoroughly enjoy the Otter book. And the teachers love it because they said that what I'm teaching is what they're teaching in school at that time.
Well, Linda, I think on that we're going to have to wind this down. We are kind of running out of time.
All right. Can I tell you one more thing that I think is important?
Yeah, go ahead.
I think that I'm a testament that one is never too young or too old to start something new. I don't look my age. I certainly don't act my age. But in July, I am going to be 80 years old.
Wow.
So this means I've started all of this since I was 74. And I think that the only failure that we ever have is to not do something. And it doesn't mean you have to be successful at it. But if you want to do something and you don't try it, then that was your only failure. I always tell people, if there's something you want to do, just do it.
That's good advice. I think everybody should heed to that advice. We do have to wind this down. Thank you so much for coming on. My guest is Linda Hansen. The books are Little Lost Dog and Otto the Otter. Let me try that again. Otto the Otter. Do you have a website that you want to give out?
www.lindahansenauthor.com.
Okay, great. Again, thanks for coming on the show. It was nice meeting you. Best of luck with your books. I hope they do well.
I thank you so much. Thank you very, very much for having me on the show.